Let's bring in the Egyptian journalist, the Arab affairs analyst, Mona Eltahawy. She's joining us once again. Mona, the protests in Tunisia led to a revolution there, and Egypt led to a revolution there. Today we're seeing Algeria, some major demonstrations going on. What's going on in the region?
It sounds to me, Wolf, like everyone's catching freedom fever. I mean, I've been tweeting about this and comparing it to a rally, you know, like some kind of rally race where the baton started in Tunisia and it handed it to Egypt. And now Egypt is kind of going, okay, who wants it next, guys? So as you said, Algeria, we saw protests in Algeria today. And interestingly, the Algerian authorities shut down Facebook. And they did, and the internet, I think it was Facebook mostly, but if you remember, Hosni Mubarak also tried to quell unrest, quote unquote, in Egypt by shutting down the internet. And I just don't think that these dictators are getting it, that it's not about shutting down Facebook and the internet, it's about listening to your people. And I think that's what this freedom fever is.
We're showing our viewers some pictures, still photos of some of the signs and some of the protests in Algeria today. What about Jordan? Is King Abdullah, is he vulnerable there?
You know, I think the entire region is vulnerable. I mean, we have to approach monarchies a bit differently than we do republics, just because of the structure of societies there. But, I mean, there he's vulnerable too. He saw protests during Egypt's uprising calling for the government to be fired, basically. And we just heard Fenullah talk about the Muslim Brotherhood there in Jordan. I think every country in the region has basically just kind of sat back and watched in amazement. Now, every dictator is obviously watching in fear, but every Arab I know is so excited by what happened, because basically what we're seeing happen, in 1 month, we saw 2 Arab dictators toppled. And Arabs are sitting back and thinking, wow, we can do this. We can get rid of these guys who've been suffocating our countries for decades upon decades. And that's not something that you can quell. And, you know, we hear of some governments, like Bahrain, for example, promised to give, I don't know, a raise or something, and others are promising all kinds of money. It's not about giving monetary incentives to stop revolutions. Surely it's about listening to your people and their desire for freedom.
Is Bashar al-Assad in Syria threatened right now?
Well, you know, there's this timetable for revolution that's been circulating around Twitter and Facebook, where every country is getting its own hashtag and date. And protests are planned in Syria, protests are planned in Libya. So countries you don't normally hear of having these kind of popular uprisings or public dissent, and that usually crush down quite harshly. Obviously, Syria and Libya are very different from Egypt. But what is the same is that people there are watching and thinking, we can do it too. And again, you know, they're on Facebook, the Libyan authorities shut down pages that were inviting people basically to this revolution. So I think everyone is vulnerable, and we will see that all these dictators try to take these measures. But once you catch freedom fever, it's hard to go back.
Are you confident that this is going to work in Egypt?
I'm very confident it's going to work, because I think, you know, hearing all the discussion so far about the armed forces, the military, will they step aside? I think what's happened in Egypt is that as the armed forces were there in the streets of Cairo, they saw the determination in Egyptian eyes. Egyptians have awakened to this amazing political empowerment, and the military knows that Egyptians will continue to rise up against anyone who tries to impose a regime on them. And I think that's what's changed in Egypt. It's changed for young people, it's changed for women, it's changed the way Muslims and Christians get along. So much has changed, and that's what keeps me optimistic.
Mona Eltahawy, I follow her on Twitter, at Mona Eltahawy. Let me spell it for our viewers here in the United States and around the world. At Mona, M-O-N-A, Eltahawy, E-L-T-A-H-A-W-Y. She's very active on Twitter. It's a good place to go. Thanks very much, Mona.
Thanks, Wolf. Thanks for that plug.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take